E-Commerce on Salesforce. We have a very packed hour, so let's get to the content as quickly as possible. First, my name is Ben Allen. I'm Senior Director of Sales and Marketing at Apttus. You may know us as a quote-to-cash solution provider built on Salesforce. That's already enough about me. Let's jump to our panel of experts who will later be discussing what we're calling Turbocharged E-Commerce on Salesforce. So today, I'm joined by Andy Hoare, who is the Principal Analyst from Forrester, Steve Riccozzi, who is the Senior VP of Operations and IT at Neopost, who is a Salesforce and Apttus customer, Raymond Juarez, who is the quote-to-cash practice lead at Blue Wolf, who is a consultancy and implementation partner of Salesforce and Apttus, and Michael Stone, who is the SVP of Marketing for the Salesforce Community Cloud. Now, before we start, let me just address a few quick housekeeping items. We will have a panel discussion and some Q&A at the end, so you can submit your questions for the panel in the Q&A section throughout the presentation. We'll answer them in the session at the end. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can either refresh your browser by pressing F5, or you can alert the panel here that you're having them in the Q&A panel. This recording will be sent to all participants after the event, as well as some other collateral. And you can also take part in the conversation about this that's happening not just here in the webinar, but on Twitter using the hashtag #FastIsTheNewBig. So at this point, I would like to introduce Andy Hoare, who is a Principal Analyst serving e-business and channel strategy for Forrester. He's primarily focused on B2B and B2B E-Commerce, as well as issues related to enabling channel partner businesses. He's the author of, among many other papers, Forrester's B2B E-Commerce Playbook. He's a leading authority on B2B E-Commerce. He's got a bunch of new papers recently published and some more coming out. We're going to get some brand new research from him today that I don't think has been published yet as well. We've asked him to come in and share his thoughts on the state of modern B2B, B2B2C, and other versions of e-commerce. So Andy, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that generous introduction there. So I thought it would be helpful, since the theme today is really about the value and virtue of speed, to share a brief story that came across my desk recently that really struck a chord. So some of you may have seen this, that Dow Chemical announced a couple months ago that they had spent 8 years and $1 billion implementing an ERP project. And I thought it would be interesting to sort of think about, what does that represent? Put some context around that. So I did a little research, and I went back to the year 2007, and so what has happened since Dow Chemical started? And again, they just recently completed, to the extent you ever complete an ERP project, but what has happened in technology just since they started their ERP project? And it was kind of interesting to see that the following 4 companies didn't exist in 2007 when Dow started their ERP project. So Airbnb didn't exist, Pinterest didn't exist, Snapchat didn't exist, and Uber, something that's kind of woven its way into the daily fabric of our lives. None of these companies existed. Today, they represent arguably $100 billion in market cap. Just to, again, put it in perspective. What's also kind of interesting to think about in terms of context of what's happened in the last, 8 years since just Dow started this ERP implementation is that Apple actually launched the iPhone. It was launched in basically April of 2007, and you can see on the screen here, this is an example of the multiple versions of that product that have been released and onto the marketplace and generated revenue. And I was just curious, so I took a look, and it turns out that Apple has probably generated about $500 billion in revenue from these devices you see before you, about $200 billion in profit, and it now represents 50% of all of Apple's revenue. Again, this is just since Dow started their ERP implementation. I think it's fair to say we live in a different world today where speed is a great deal more important, arguably, than it used to be. You've always had big companies and small companies, but I think what we've seen now is the emergence of a dividing line between slow companies and fast companies. To kind of illustrate the point, the best obvious of all are the fast big companies. That sort of stands to reason. The worst are the slow small companies, and they generally just cease to exist because they're slow and small and they've got neither scale nor speed. The most common kind of company you'll find out there, especially in B2B land, is, I don't mean this is pejorative necessarily, but the slow big companies. That's the most common. And then occasionally you run across these fast small companies. They tend to be more startup-ish. And what they lack really is scale. They are like the big fast companies, but they're small. And sometimes they grow into the companies we saw on the last screen. Sometimes they stay the size they are, and sometimes, they go away. But the reality is everybody wants to get into this category. And every one of our clients, every company I talk to, is at varying points along that continuum and trying to go from slow and big into fast and big. And these are examples of companies that exist there today. Facebook, Google, Amazon, there are others. It's not an exhaustive list. But what's interesting is it's our belief that these slow companies, whether they're big or small, are really going to struggle in this new age, the age of the custom where agile development methodologies and speed to market and iteration and cycles, et cetera, are so much more important. What's interesting here is you look at all the big, fast companies. If you notice what they all have in common, they're all technology companies. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, they have to be more responsive and more rapid in their ability to execute. But I think it also makes the point that what they also have in common is they have a different mentality. In their DNA, they're about speed and they're about iteration. And I think there's a lesson to be learned here for the other companies, especially the big, slow companies, that if you really want to become a big, fast company, you got to change your culture and you have to change the way you think. And those are not, by the way, easy things to do. So that said, I want to kind of jump into now sort of my read on the state of B2B e-commerce, just very, very briefly. So you've probably seen these numbers out there. We project that by the year 2020, U.S. B2B e-commerce will equal $1.1 trillion. It'll be more than twice the size of B2C. It is today. It will be at that point. But I think it's also worth noting, oops, let me go back a slide here. Sorry about that. If you look at the bottom, share of total B2B sales, where it says 8.5% in 2014, going up to 12.1% in 2020. What's particularly interesting, just a quick note here, is that's about the same penetration of commerce in B2B as it is in B2C. It's about 10% in B2C today, and it's about 10% today in B2B. The difference is in B2C, because people like to go to stores and touch and feel things, there's really kind of a ceiling on that. I don't think it's ever going to be more than 15, 20%. Putting aside mobile for a moment because it's unclear whether that's an offline sale or an online sale, especially if you're in a store. Putting that aside for a moment, B2B isn't hampered by that same ceiling. Most of the buying that's done in B2B is done at a distance anyway, over the phone usually. It's somewhat done in person, but it's really an over-the-phone kind of thing. So there's nothing hampering B2B's ability to be 20, 30, 40, 50% maybe at some point of all of its sales, all of its commerce being e-commerce. So not only are these numbers big, but I think the penetration of all of commerce is going to be even bigger. But it's worth noting that we're still really kind of in the early stages of the process. This is a maturity model that Forrester has published for several years, and these are the most recent two iterations of it for B2B. And you can see the curve shows what percentage, by our estimates, of B2B companies fit into each one of these phases. Greenhorns is the earliest phase, and role models is the most advanced phase. In 2012, it skewed more toward the greenhorns and the apprentices, and there were very few role models. By 2014, it had shifted, but it's still the case the majority of B2B companies are really less than 5 years into B2B e-commerce, whether that's selling online or deciding to sell online or et cetera. We still have a long way to go, but what's interesting is not only are the preponderance of them still early into it, but it's also worth noting there are, in fact, some companies in the role model phase. I would say companies like the Grangers of the world that are really acting more like B2C companies. They have advanced analytics capabilities. They have hundreds of people doing this. They compete pretty effectively with the Amazons of the world. At the same time that we have some B2B companies that haven't decided whether they're going to even sell online. So it's a bit of a bifurcated market, although the vast majority are still very early. What's driving all of this, though, and this transformation and all this opportunity is really changes to the B2B buying process. I'm sure many of you have seen these numbers just quickly. Two-thirds basically of B2B buyers tell us they research half or more of their work purchases online. The percentage today is about a third of B2B buyers say that they make half or more of their work purchases online. So the last slide was about research. This one's about buying online. And they expect that number to double. We think it's a bit aggressive in a 3-year time frame, but it shows that their appetite for buying online is growing. Why they're shifting from offline environments to online or omni-channel, our surveys consistently show that it's convenience. That's the number one. But notice here, in our break with sort of B2C, the fourth answer is to save money. Now, in B2C, and we've seen pretty consistently, much of the reason why people shift their purchases into an online environment is because it's cheaper. All the survey research shows that consumers actually believe they get better deals online. Whether they do or not is a different story. I think they generally do, but that's open to question. But their belief is very clear. They believe the deals are better online. But in a B2B environment, it's only the fourth choice. So don't be seduced by the fact that you think everybody wants to go online because they can get better deals, get better prices. Yes, there's a dimension of that in B2B, but the primary reason why they are going online or moving in a multi-channel environment is for convenience sake. I think it's also worth noting that Amazon is a player in the B2B space. They've had some fits and starts. They had something called Amazon Supply. It's not Amazon Business, and it's really more of a marketplace. It's a new model. It's more akin to what they've done with Amazon Marketplace and the B2C end of things. But it doesn't change the fact that 82% of B2B buyers say they've used Amazon to make a purchase for work. It could be anything. It could be toilet paper, coffee, bolt fasteners, drills. It could be any manner of things. But the point is, Amazon is a player here, influencing definitely the purchase of certain verticals and certain products. It's also worth noting that brand manufacturers are being called to something here. I've heard it dozens of times, brand manufacturers, suppliers, as we call them in B2B, just say things like, well, we're going to let the channel do all the selling. We'll be a resource for information, but, our customers want to buy through the channel because they always have. Well, we had some research that came back recently that said nearly half of all B2B buyers said they would prefer to buy a product directly from the brand that manufactures it versus a distributor that sells it. When half of your customers are saying, hey, we'd actually like to buy from you directly, that's something to stand up and take notice of. We also know that a little over a quarter of all B2B buyers said not only do they want to buy directly, they actually be willing to pay a premium to buy directly from a brand manufacturer. So, whether they're doing it today or not, they will be soon. Brand manufacturers are waking up to the fact that there are a segment of customers that they need to serve in a direct fashion. So all this is creating an interesting kind of evolving ecosystem. Just so you an illustration of this, we believe it's not either or, but rather and when it comes to selling. We believe that if the product is inexpensive and the sales cycle is short and the product tends to be more on the generic sale end of things, it's likely that person's going to buy in a self-serve portal. So you can see that in the lower left-hand corner. On the other hand, if it's an expensive product with a long sales cycle and maybe there's some customization to it or installation associated with it, then like an MRI machine or an earth mover, it's more likely that a field sales team would handle that. But what's interesting is there's this area in the middle, and we see the horizon shifting. Increasingly, people are expressing interest in buying products online and more expensive products and products that typically have longer sales cycle and are more customized. They're expressing interest in using the web to do that, which also brings a different group into the mix here, which is inside salespeople and CSRs, customer service representatives. As that horizon shifts, you now see inside salespeople and CSRs who are actually booking orders for clients and acting like field salespeople in a way. We had research from a client came back recently that said that their customers trusted their inside salespeople and customer service reps better at understanding their business than the field salesperson assigned to them, who presumably is more experienced and more well-trained. They actually trust the inside people more than the outside people. And I think that's because they have a different kind of relationship. You don't feel like you're under pressure for any reason. So this is an interesting continuum from self-serve to full-serve, and this is where we believe there's a lot of opportunity, and it's not as discrete as it used to be. So let me show you a quick example of what form this takes. So there's a company called Dry-Ease. They make industrial dehumidifiers, like the thing in the red box there. It's about a $1,500 product. Companies like ServiceMaster buy them to remove flooding in a basement of a business. Their world used to look like this, where they were the brand manufacturer. They distributed through companies like Fastenal, Grainger, McMaster Carr, and ultimately, the ServiceMaster was the company that bought the product. Well, some things have changed. This is now a great deal more like what the world looks like for a Dry-Ease. Some of those offline distributors are online now. In fact, all of them are. One of them is offering a private label version that competes directly against the Dry-Ease brand. That's the one in the upper right-hand corner. And then in the distribution space, there are all these new players. And this is not an exhaustive list. I actually gave up after about 45 minutes to an hour when I put this together. But you can see that $1,500 dehumidifier is available at Sears, which is a B2C site. It's available from Fastenal, Grainger, McMaster Carr, and dozens of others, both online and offline. And then a bunch of pure play guys. I didn't even put Amazon in here, but it's available on Amazon as well. What is interesting, though, is the red line there indicates that Dry-Ease does not currently sell direct. Now, should they? My opinion, yes, because their distribution layer has been disrupted. But I think they're still of the belief that by selling direct, they're going to disrupt their channel. Well, I think you can see from the picture here, that's already happened. So all of this is causing companies to rethink, how they go to market and what technology they need to support a self-serve to a full-serve, commerce operation. We've seen in our research that in the next 18 months, 45% of B2B e-commerce professionals said they will change or upgrade their B2B E-Commerce platform technology solution. It's 3 times higher in B2B than it is in B2C, which is about 12-15%. So there's a lot of investment going into B2B at this point, and for good reason. I think we've illustrated that there's a need for it, and in many cases they're doing it now because they fell behind the curve. We also know there's a lot of interest in SaaS. This is kind of a complicated chart, but the takeaway from it is that effectively 1/3 of the firms that we've surveyed in the last couple of years, and this is pretty consistent, has said they have plans or already moving to a SaaS-based e-commerce environment within the next 2 years. Only about 27-28% of the companies we surveyed said they have no plans to use SaaS. So a cloud-based environment is, in fact, where a lot of these companies are headed, and they're seeing the total time to market and the total cost of ownership opportunities, and they're embracing them. So I want to close with this thought. I think one of the issues with companies is they think like humans. We tend to think that everything is linear, and that growth happens, for example, for businesses in linear fashion over time. But that just isn't the case. I mean, the reality is that growth is actually curvilinear or exponential. We've seen this with mobile, social networking, and now the cloud. These are things that lay dormant, literally, for years. Somebody invents it. Nobody's really doing much with it. Some early adopters say, hey, this is pretty interesting. Pay attention. And then all of a sudden it gets embraced. And like I said, it happened with mobile and social networking and everything else. Those weren't the first mobile devices. Those weren't the first social networking sites. And, a lot of the cloud-based companies say we're not the first cloud-based companies in their own space. But what happens is you get these growth curves, and you've got to move to them because they move pretty quickly. To illustrate the point, it kind of depends where you are on the curve. So here's time point A, right? If you think this is where we are with your particular industry or particular form of technology, then if you look at the growth, which is the y-axis, between those 2 points, that growth is pretty minimal, right? But take a look at this. What happens if you're at this point? It's the same size, by the way. It's an optical illusion, but the two red bars are the same distance on the x at both time points. But look at the difference in the growth with the second one. So it has a lot to do with timing. I think we're actually at the low end of this curve with cloud and B2B, and I believe that we're about to enter that curve part. So if you're investing, I think the time to invest really is now if you want to capture the exponential version of this curve. So on that note, let me hand it back to Ben, who I think is going to take it from here. Ben?
Great. Thanks so much, Andy. That was some really great insights there. And I think that we all get a sense there's a lot of disruption, a lot of change happening, and some urgency to take action on these items. So I want to take a minute now to introduce someone who did recently take action on these items. We have with us Steve Riccozzi, who's the SVP of Operations and IT for Neopost. By way of introduction, Steve has held operations and IT leadership roles in multiple Fortune 500 companies, include GE, Icon, Unisource. He also started and sold his own healthcare company, so he's a vet. Steve was recently faced with some of the same challenges that you just discussed, and Neopost is obviously, as Steve will talk to us about, not a brand new company on the scene. So Steve, thanks for joining us. Let me start by asking you just to give us some brief background on Neopost as a company.
Okay, I'd love to. Neopost has been around 93 years, so, been around for a while. Most people know us for when they get an envelope and there's no stamps and there's red ink. We manufacture and sell the machines that do that worldwide. But that's not all we do, and we've really evolved over time, kind of what Andy was talking about evolving. What we've heard from our customers is they need help interacting with their customers better. So our tagline is send, receive, connect, and our whole purpose is to make it easier for our customers to send things to their customers, get things back, and really make that connection. And if you think about it, Andy talked about the companies like Amazon. Well, Amazon can make a huge investment in shipping and other things like that, mailing, but most small to medium-sized companies and even large companies don't have the IT budget to do that. So what we do is we build tools that allow them to compete toe-to-toe. We have shipping solutions that they can figure out the most cost-effective manner to ship something and be able to track it. We have data cleansing tools so that they can cleanse their customer information, so when they mail something to their customer, they know it's going to their customer and not getting returned because they couldn't deliver it. So, I mean, that's kind of what we're in the market of helping our customers communicate and interact with their customers.
Well, that's really good background, and the reason we have Steve on here is primarily to tell the story around Apttus and Salesforce and how he has transformed his business. But exactly what he's talking about there is the ability to enable companies who may not have the scale of an Amazon to act like a faster company and be able to respond more rapidly to the market. So, Steve, to take a step back for just a second, can you give us some context about why you initially chose Salesforce for your platform of customer engagement?
Yeah, well, when we were taking a look at a CRM tool, I think a lot of companies had experience we had, 5 years ago. We tried to force a tool on our sales reps. And, it wasn't cloud-based, it was VPN-based, so if they wanted to use it, they had to be in the office or VPN in, which was a pain for them. It wasn't intuitive. It didn't have a GUI interface. And in all honesty, our sales reps didn't like working with it. So when we went out to find a CRM tool that would make sense for us, number one, it had to be cloud-based. We want them to be able to work from their home, from a coffee shop, from a customer location, or in the office. We didn't want them to be tethered behind our firewall. Other thing we really cared about is the ease of use and the interface to it. We wanted to make something simple so a sales rep didn't need a lot of training. They want to sell. They don't want to sit in a training class learning how to use a CRM. And the last piece that was important, we really needed something that gave sales management a view into what the sales professionals were doing. Who was in the pipeline? Where were they in the pipeline? What was coming up? So they could have an intelligent conversation. And that was key to us. And I'm going to sound like a Salesforce commercial, and I don't mean to, but when we looked 5 years ago, there weren't a lot of companies out there that really had this vision in place and running. Salesforce was out there, and they were the one that we felt the most confident that had the backing. The one concern you have when you move with the new technology is make sure you pick a company that's going to have some size and backing behind it. And picking Salesforce, I think we did the right thing, and we've been really happy with it.
Great, and I think we'll get into this a little later, but as it turns out, Salesforce is that platform that has ultimately allowed Steve and Neopost to enable not just his direct sellers, but his partner channels and his end customers as well. So tell us a little bit about your before state. You're now up and running with Apttus E-Commerce, but before that you had multiple regional sites, you had some disparate processes and systems. Tell us a little bit about the challenges that introduced for you.
Well, being 93 years old, we have a direct channel and we also have a dealer channel. And what's happened over time is we've acquired some of our dealers. And we acquired the biggest and best dealers, and guess what? They had made an investment in e-commerce. So we had 10 of our regions with 10 different e-commerce solutions, plus we had a corporate e-commerce solution. They were all in different stages of evolution and maturity. They didn't share common data. They didn't have the same functionality, and they didn't represent the same face to our customer. So we really kind of had a mess. And we realized that, what was important to us was that the customer had the same look and feel no matter where they interacted with us and got the same information, and it was consistent. The other thing was it was cumbersome, all of them. They were built on older technologies. It took 10 steps to do a single order, which in my mind is a lot to ask a customer to go through. So we kind of had a mess that was antiquated, and we really needed to revamp and get to a modern solution.
So you mentioned there the consistency of customer experience, and I know part of your rebranding initiative, the whole send, receive, connect new message that you rolled out with was accompanied by that My Neopost portal. Was the goal of that portal to deliver that consistent experience across all channels?
Yeah, here's the important thing to us. Not every customer wants to interact with us the same way. Some want to talk on the phone, some want to go to the web, some might want to use, some other social media way to interact with us. And what we want to do is build it so our customers get the same exact experience and information no matter how they interact with us. I don't want them to go to the web and find out the data there is out of date compared to what they get from the phone, because then they won't use the web anymore. So the whole idea behind My Neopost was real-time, same data they get talking to a live person, one-stop shopping. I also didn't want them to have to remember, if I do these 3 things, I can go on the web, but these other 2 I have to call a live person. We want it to be soup to nuts. You can see your bill online. You can pay your bill online. You can buy supplies online. You can do a service request. Anything they wanted to do, we wanted to have out there, so if they prefer to use the web, and that's where a lot of customers are going to, they could do it all there.
Great. So now we're talking about Salesforce and Apttus being the core source of customer truth and delivering that consistent customer experience no matter what channel they approach you from. So one of the questions that I see frequently, we all know about the flexibility of the Salesforce platform. It can be appealing to do it yourself on some of these initiatives. Why did you look to a partner to deliver e-commerce as opposed to building it yourself?
Well, I think every CIO has that decision point, build versus buy. And I'm kind of on the mindset you only build if what you're building will give you a distinct competitive advantage that you can't get by using something else. Because if you think about it, if I want to build my own e-commerce site, which some of the ones we had in our 10 different systems were homegrown, some were store-bought. If I want to build it myself, to build something with the flexibility and tools that someone who does this for a living can do, I can't match that. I'd spend $2 million building something that probably wouldn't be as good. I'd have to maintain it ongoing myself, which is not what I want my people to do. There's 3 things that I want my IT professionals doing. I want them adding value by either turning data into information so the business can make decisions. I want them building productivity tools so that we can save money, or tools that help us grow our sales. And anything, if we're like e-commerce, there's a savings or a growth thing for us if we do it. So if there is, we ought to do it quickly. I have a quote on my wall, anything worth doing is worth doing fast. You can buy faster than you can build. And that's why I went with buy.
Absolutely. So there are options out there. What led you to Apttus as that partner to deliver the solution?
Well, I talked earlier about the fact we'd already settled on Salesforce, and we were very happy with it. When we needed a CPQ, configure, price, quote tool, we took about 14 months and took a look at all the players in the industry. And, the outcome, we selected Apttus after a long time, and we've been really happy with that decision. One of the key things we wanted to find in a CPQ tool is I wanted to have it part of the Salesforce ecosystem. I didn't want to have to replicate data all over the place. That was a real big deal to me. And if you take a look when I'm looking for e-commerce, If I can use the data I already have in the Salesforce ecosystem, it saves me time, it saves me money, and it saves me having, potentially duplicate data that can get out of sync. And about the time we were looking for this is about when Apttus was launching your e-commerce solution, and, your CEO, Kirk, had asked if we were willing to be early adopters. And we definitely were, and we've been really happy with it.
Absolutely. So now you just touched on a couple of these points, but you've now got a single consolidated solution addressing your channels with Salesforce and Apttus. What are some of the benefits of that native solution compared to integrating external platforms and piecing this together like you had done before?
Well, I think every IT person on the call has had this experience. When you have non-integrated solutions, you have three problems. Data consistency, because there's always going to be an update lag. Now, some cases it might be a second, sometimes it's overnight. So depending on where you're looking, you're going to get different data potentially, and that's a bad thing. The other thing is, who owns the problem? When you have these non-integrated solutions that you're trying to tie together, the two companies always finger point. They're like, wait a second, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And you're stuck in the middle as an IT leader. All you care about is getting solved. You don't care whose fault it is, but you can get stuck in that middle part. And really, and the last and most important thing to me is interface consistency. If you have the same employees using two different disparate systems, they have to have two different logins. They have to remember how things work, where things are stored, how they're different. Whereas if you go with a solution like we did with Apttus and Salesforce together, even though they're two different companies, the interface of the customer to our end user, they log in once. They really don't understand the difference between when they're moving from one to the other. It's the same thing to them. So I'm not retraining and reteaching, and not once in the year and a half we've been up did I ever get any whose fault is it problems. We just move forward and get it done. So it's been a big benefit.
So last question for you at this point. I think in a few minutes when we come back to the panel, I do want to get your opinions on how people who are thinking about doing this on Salesforce should start to structure their thoughts. But how are you measuring success in this initiative? How do you know if you've done a good job?
Well, I think there's three things you need to measure when you're looking at e-commerce. Number one is customer adoption rate. Because if you build it and they don't come, you wasted a bunch of money. Next is revenue per order. Are you able to increase the revenue you get per order through upsells and times and things like that? And the third being cost per transaction. Those are really the three things in my mind that you have to measure, and those are the things we are measuring, and I'm happy to say we've seen improvements in all three of those as part of the e-commerce project.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve, for your input. We'll come back to you in the panel here in a minute. I'll just move through a couple quick points here because I do want to get to the panel discussion. Well, here's the slide that I forgot to show about their results, but we'll post these later. When we talk about some of the points that Andy brought up earlier, some of these statistics that he had brought up are somewhat shocking to me, that 93% of B2B buyers say that they would rather buy online, but right now only 25% of B2B firms are actively selling online. So there's an enormous gulf and opportunity to approach those buyers where they want to purchase. Right now, another piece of information from Andy's research is that 91% of all B2B transactions are still happening offline for all the reasons that Andy discussed earlier. So I'm going to take a second here and just ask a quick poll. We'll see how well our audience conforms to the data that Andy has collected himself. But how many of you out there allow your customers to make purchases online? Take just a second and get some results. So far, we're seeing a bit of a majority of people enabling customers to make purchases online, but not dramatically higher. So I'll take just a minute more. We're still getting results pretty rapidly here. Looks like this audience is a little bit better behaved when it comes to enabling those online purchases than Andy's sample so far. All right. So from the results that we've seen so far, a little more than half of you are enabling customers to make purchases online, but still not the vast majority, and still a lot of you have opportunities to do that. When it comes to making those online purchases, there are some big barriers in the B2B context that can make it difficult. We're not talking about the restriction of putting up a simple web storefront. Anyone can do that nowadays. But when we talk about B2B transactions, there can be things like configuring products, configuring bundles and solutions, making sure that those are compatible with what a customer may already own. Pricing may get complex if it's handled by channel tiers. There may be contract or customer-specific pricing. These are historically difficult things to address in an online web store. So the great thing about Apttus is this is exactly why Apttus is offering e-commerce, is because these are the historical challenges that we have tasked ourselves with taking down. So when we talk about turbocharged e-commerce on Salesforce, this is exactly what we're talking about, the ability to overcome these hurdles. Now, if you're familiar with Apttus at all, it's probably because you understand our presence in CPQ, understand our presence in contract management. Well, those are the same capabilities that need to be delivered online to manifest some of these sales that make B2B transactions complicated. And when it comes to delivering them on the Salesforce platform, that's where you get a lot more of that speed element. Salesforce enables you to deploy this in a fraction of the time that historical legacy systems are. You can go mobile and global on day one. There's all the established integration frameworks that Salesforce and Apttus already have. And we'll talk a little bit later about the communities aspect that is enabling even greater adoption and interaction with customers. And more than anything, you heard Steve talk about having a single source of truth for customers, products, pricing, and a single consistent experience, all based in Salesforce. The bottom line right now is that today's e-commerce is smarter than ever. Recommending products that have the highest margins, the most inventory, any of those things can be accomplished. It's easy to run promotions that are visible not just to your end customers, but that your partners and that your direct sales reps can see as well. So the combination of Salesforce and Apttus is available to you right now, and I think the question that I have is, if you don't have an e-commerce presence, what are you losing right now? And I think everyone knows that they're losing revenue opportunities, but you're also losing market share when you're allowing your customers to go to an outlet that is easier for them to do business with. Now, we got some good metrics from Steve earlier about how he's thinking about success, but one of the data points that we picked up from Dreamforce this year was how Salesforce is measuring success as they power their web store using Apttus as well. Their transaction size has actually increased 33% by using Apttus, and primarily it's because they're able to overcome some of those hurdles that previously required a direct salesperson to interact with the customer to handle, things like customer-specific pricing, all of that. So the results are there, the urgency is there. The question is, why wouldn't you do something about it right now? So at this point, I'm going to hand over the discussion back to our panel, and I'm going to invite a couple of our panelists who we have not heard from yet. Raymond Juarez is a quote-to-cash practice lead from Blue Wolf. Raymond brings 15 years of leadership and business advisory to Fortune 500 companies spanning the U.S., EMEA, Asia-Pac. He's done energy, financial services, healthcare, IT, software. He's done it all. Thanks for joining us, Raymond. We're also joined by Michael Stone, who is the SVP of Marketing for the Community Cloud at Salesforce. He's been there since 2013. He oversaw the global launch of Communities, as well as all the outbound marketing. So if folks in the chat, if you have a question for the panel, please enter it in the Q&A now, but I'll start off with a few questions that I've already developed. So first, Raymond, how does a multi-channel e-commerce or partner commerce strategy fit into someone's overall view on quote-to-cash?
Sure. Thank you, Ben. Well, first, I'd like to start with a basic premise, and that is your quote-to-cash initiative should be making it easier for your customers to transact business with you, full stop. In today's economy, and very much in line with what Andy shared earlier, your customers are expecting this convenience, and the speed of doing business will help drive and sustain their loyalty. So when we look at multi-channel, it's an incredibly important element that underpins an effective quote-to-cash strategy, because not only does multi-channel broaden your sales funnel, but as Steve from Neopost mentioned, it creates this seamless commerce experience irrespective of channel. So what we're finding is that leading organizations today who we're working with, they are exploiting this touch point with their customers by providing them with immediate pricing or product information, access to their assets or entitlement information, all of which allow the customer to make an informed purchasing decision. So if you're not thinking about multi-channel as part of your overall broad quote-to-cash strategy, you could be missing out on an important customer touch point and thus allowing room for your competitors to thrive.
Absolutely.
Now,
So Sorry, go ahead, Raymond.
I was just going to say to your second question, about preparation, what should our audience be considering when embarking on e-commerce? Wherever you are on this digital maturity scale, there are some universal considerations that will help you bring this e-commerce channel initiative forward quickly, but without compromising its overall efficacy. So I would say one of the first things to do or to consider is really conduct an honest assessment of your overall readiness to truly gauge how well aligned you are internally between sales, marketing, finance, and IT. I'm sure Steve at Neopost can certainly share and give some context, but you essentially want to make decisions efficiently and have those decisions be based on data versus traditional norms. So, for example, we worked with a client who is in a very high margin business. It was very difficult for them to really imagine the necessity to set up a low-cost channel to target and nurture their customers. So when we put on our data-driven hat, we really looked at estimating how an e-commerce channel affects the potential upside and downside to the P&L. And we were able to determine that this channel was an effective way to stave off competition and defend their market share against resellers. So when you're balancing your readiness alongside your e-commerce business objectives, you will improve the speed at which your team is able to make decisions quickly and more efficiently.
Great. That's some great context. Mike Stone from Salesforce, can you give us a little insight about communities? Communities is a key part of what we see people rolling into e-commerce strategies built on Salesforce. How are communities helping accelerate growth, adoption, all of that collaboration when it comes to e-commerce strategies on Salesforce?
Well, it's a new idea, and kind of we think about it as sort of the next major phase of e-commerce, and throw around this idea of contextual commerce that I think is really powerful and we see growing very quickly. If you look back even at sort of what Andy and Steve have been talking about, Andy talked about this tremendous amount of demand of customers that prefer to buy online. But it was really interesting, the chart that he showed of why people want to do this, that the second most common reason was the faster process, and then number 3 was they wanted to get more and better information on products. And where people go to do that today is a community. They will go online, they want to hear, it's very normal now that people want to hear from other users of a product. They want to get direct advice from other customers who use product in the same way. They find that source of information is very very trustworthy, and they can find people that want to do exactly the same thing with that product as they plan to do. So it's a very targeted source of information. And so if you've got people that are going and they're in the purchase process, they're going to a community to go out and research a specific product alternative, what we've found is that they're right there, they are ready to buy, right? That's where they're seeing other customers, they've made the decision, they've read a bunch of reviews on a specific product, they've found which one's right for them. So what our vision is to make sure that buy button, that add to cart capability is made as easy as possible. So it's literally put directly in the same window. That's the context portion. So if somebody's in a group discussing a specific product or a type of solution, that we can put a mini store in that discussion that will expose a buy button just for those products that are being discussed in that particular feed. So it makes it really seamless for the buyer to just go and immediately add something to the cart. And this really ties in a lot of what Neopost was talking about also, as far as the single platform, all the information, when the customer is looking for that information, our ability to tie Salesforce files out into that community so there's a single source of truth for product specs and FAQs and knowledge articles and pricing information that's all coming from one source that's shared across the community so that data stays in sync. They can find information quickly. And then they have that one place to go so that when they're going out and trying to find the right product, we make it just one step to go out and click that buy button and conduct the transaction. So it's, I think, a really powerful idea. The customers that we've seen that are doing it are really excited and seeing great results in terms of combining the store, the catalog, and the community into one single experience.
Absolutely. I think that really resonates with what we've seen at Apttus as well, which is most customers wanting to have a communities-based experience, partly to maintain that single source of truth about who their customers are and what they're talking about, but also to offer that online forum for them to make those purchasing decisions, to make those discussions take place, and to be more informed buyers, which I think is a point that Andy was making earlier as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. That great thing is that it really benefits the customer, where they get a great seamless experience, a branded experience on the community, but also the vendor themselves gets that great visibility into understanding what the customer is interested in, knowing their sort of interests and behavior in the context of the actual commerce engine. So it's a fantastic, everybody wins and gets better service, which is great.
Absolutely. So I'll ask this question once in kind of a broad context to Andy from Forrester, but then again more specifically to Steve from Neopost. But Andy, in your perspective, when you talk to many companies about their next efforts, and as you mentioned, many of them are evaluating new e-commerce platforms, what are some of the critical success factors that maybe B2B companies in particular need to assess when they're looking to grow their e-commerce sales?
Yes, I think actually Steve touched on these earlier. I'll just kind of reiterate it and add a little color to it. But he mentioned, customer adoption. He talked about, I think revenue per order and then cost per transaction. Those are, I think, three of the biggest sort of key areas. One is how many of your customers are using it and do they enjoy it? There's a loyalty dimension to it as well, which can only be measured over time. So you're not going to know right away whether their loyalty is increased, but you can and should measure that. The revenue per order, I'm going to come to that one in a second. Cost per transaction, I mean, we know from clients we work with that have moved into an online environment, or actually an omni-channel environment, that they've consistently cut their cost to serve by 50%. One client I know cut it by 90%, because when you're paying a sales rep a commission, for example, to book an order, that's an expensive way to do business, but it may have been the only way or a necessary way to do it. Today, that customer can go book it themselves through your website at a fraction of the cost. And so there's some real advantages to moving some of the transaction volume online just from a cost perspective. But the revenue per order one is a really interesting one. We've always looked at it and called it average order value. We've surveyed about this, and what's interesting is that you expect to see average order value increase, right? But what we started to see and started to hear from some clients is that their average order value actually wasn't increasing. It was actually decreasing. And they were worried, and they reached out and said, hey, what's going on here? We expected our average order value to consistently increase. And it turns out the reason why their average order value was decreasing, and I'll tell you how we know this in a second, was because they had built such an effective website that their customers, the friction associated with making a purchase was so low that they just bought more frequently. And the reason we knew that this wasn't an issue is because their year-over-year total spend was increasing. So I guess in short, who cares how many times they make an order, how many orders they have? As long as the total spend increases, that's the really important metric. Again, perfect world, you want AOV to increase and total spend, but total spend is the key metric. And if AOV is going down, it could actually be a symbol that you're more sophisticated and more mature. I want to make one other sort of quick point about something that was talked about earlier. It's really important you understand how your customers are different in an omni-channel environment versus an offline-only environment. You can't just build a website and they will come, because you may actually build the wrong website. In some cases, people just want an ordering mechanism. If it's just literally porting people to the online world so they can place their own orders and that's it, that's one thing versus kind of a browse environment where you may be actually trying to attract a new type of customer in addition to your existing customers. And all this changes based on whether somebody is doing an initial purchase versus a replenishment or reorder purchase. Like that chart I showed you earlier about what types of purchases people make in a self-serve portal. It tends to be less expensive, lower sales cycle, or shorter sales cycle, I should say, and also more generic. That's true. However, once somebody makes a first purchase that was highly considered and they spent a bunch of time educating themselves about, oftentimes 2 through N of those purchases, they could just reorder on their own online. So it's important to consider what type of purchase it is as well. And I think that's one of the critical things that we've heard from our clients, and the smart ones are really getting into the details about what do these customers want, what do the buying scenarios look like, and what kind of competitive environment do they face at every step along the way in the buyer journey.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, especially as we think about the Neopost use case. And I'll ask Steve here another question in a minute. But Steve, I believe your initial foray was to have a maybe heavily considered purchase at the beginning, where someone's looking at a postage metering machine or some software or some services. The simple thing is to allow and enable them to make a purchase of supplies and goods afterwards, like toner and things like that. Is that where you initially thought of enabling e-commerce for reordering, and how have you thought about developing that over time?
Well, yeah, I mean, we want to walk before we could run. So if you take a look at the repetitive, low dollar amount orders, we want to move to there because they have a very high cost per transaction. So, and when you look at that, though, you make that successful, it's easy then to start saying, well, let's put our low-end machines in. Let's put the machines in you don't need a sales professional to explain all the features of, because they're fairly straightforward. So you kind of move your way up the value chain. But there's one thing I would like to add, and I think you made some great points about how you measure. But one thing you got to remember when you start e-commerce, you now have exposed your data to the customer. And sometimes you don't realize how much filtering the customer service rep is doing over the phone. They look at data, go, oh, I know that's wrong, but they know what's going on. You have to make sure your data's clean. And we didn't have a lot of big snafus with it, but we found some little irksome things that we had to work through because our data wasn't as clean as it needed to be to expose it all to your customers that easily.
So that's a really good point. It gets to the next question I was going to ask you, which is there anything else that you needed to consider when you were going to roll out e-commerce? Certainly, you've just mentioned some of them. You also had some downstream implications, some other integrations, and some of the most frequent questions that we're getting in the chat right now are about the downstream implications of the integrations. Can you talk about what it looked like in your overall IT architecture and your stack?
Yeah, and I know someone said that, Oracle, we run Oracle, and we're actually on 11.5.10. We're not on the most current version. So someone asked about, the integrations. What's worked for us is you have to pick one data master, and we decided to pick for our products and our customer to make Salesforce our customer master, moving it from Oracle. But after we've done that, we've built integration tools so that when you make a change, it propagates immediately into the other systems with the data. So you need a master, but you need to immediately propagate when you make a change to the other locations. And we use web methods, but there's a lot of tools out there, and we haven't had really much problem at all keeping the data integrated, moving back and forth. In fact, once we got that up and running, it was almost worry-free.
Very good. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, and actually the questions that were coming in from the chat were mostly around technological downstream integrations, and I think you covered some of that there, and certainly that there are many others that we have handled. I would just offhand mention that there seems to be some unfamiliarity with the Apttus capabilities when it comes to shopping cart, payment integrations, tax integrations. Those are all very much in existence, and also because of the leverage of the Salesforce platform, what we talked about earlier, the existing integration frameworks make integrating to any new things more of a question of integrating to Salesforce than to Apttus specifically. But certainly for things like a complex order that may need to be decomposed, there could be some more integrations that are required, but those are all taken care of as well. If there are no other questions, I think that we can close up and end shop here. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. I had one more question about scaling the selling strategy, but that was the one I asked Steve there at the end. So more questions as they come in. We can try to get back to you directly, but thank you to the panel for showing up here today and talking to us through this solution. We do have a weekly demo, I believe, of Apttus E-Commerce, and as well as our other solutions. So for those of you who we're requesting more of a look at the product and the capabilities. That is available on a weekly basis from Apttus. I did want to mention that you will shortly receive an email including the recording from today's presentation, and it will also have with it a discount code for the Apttus Accelerate Conference. And I think actually all of these, or maybe most of these speakers who you heard from today, will also be at that conference. So it's in April, it's in San Francisco. I think you get 50% off if you use that code, so look out for that email, and you can take action on that. Thanks again to Apttus, well, thank me, Blue Wolf, Salesforce, Neopost, and Forrester. We look forward to seeing you all further down the line, and thanks for spending time with us today. Bye.